Greetings, friends and family. Welcome to our first new video of the year, in which I'm talking about the Zamas out in South Africa. If you haven't heard about this, is the miners who were holed up underground for months on end upon the order of the police and the authorities, right, as a way to smoke them out. This episode just ended on January 16, I believe, but it's still ongoing, of course, as the aftermath of that, which I'll talk about in the video as well. But I also just want to thank you guys. We hit 500 subscribers sometime this month in the past couple weeks, so I'm very proud of that. This channel started as me just doing something for my students at the time that I couldn't reach during COVID, and so just to see it gain a following beyond that and continue to grow has been lovely. And you would have also noticed that when we hit 500, the name changed from Pan-African Lectures to Pan-African Conversations, and that sort of speaks to what I'm trying to orient the channel towards going forward. I'm no longer just lecturing, which is what I was doing with the students early on, but I'm hoping to have more conversations. I'm learning a lot as well, whether it's via your comments, whether it's just sometimes you put something out, then immediately you learn something after the fact that would have edified it. So I'm just trying to keep this as an ongoing conversation, as well as bringing in different people, interviewing them, doing this sort of like current affairs videos as well, such as this one. So yeah, we've changed from Pan-African Lectures to Pan-African Conversations. But without further ado, let's get into the action here. Let's talk about the Zamas in Stilfontein Mine in Northwest Province in South Africa. And let's just talk about this very ugly episode in modern Southern African history, indeed. Thank you very much. On January 16, 2024, 246 miners were pulled out from an abandoned mine shaft at Bafosfontein gold mine in the northwest of South Africa, where hundreds, and depending on the reports, maybe thousands of unauthorized miners working illegally in the mines, known in the streets as Zamas, which we'll talk about a bit later, had been trapped for months. But the rescue operation also retrieved 87 bodies from the mine. 87 bodies. The standoff between police and miners began last August, September, when police surrounded the abandoned gold mine's entrance with the goal of forcing the miners to emerge and then arresting them, right? South African Police Services, or SAPS, also reportedly cut off deliveries of food and water to the miners. And one government minister, Kumbuzo Chaveni, this has become the rallying cry. They've become the villain of this whole thing for saying, we are not sending help to criminals. We are going to smoke them out, right? The same way that people smoke out snakes from underground or some things like that. Since September, then hundreds, maybe thousands, as I said, have been holed up in this vast tunnel of networks under the Stilfontein mine without adequate food or water. Indeed, several people have been rescued in sporadic and slow attempts by community members using ropes. In November, right, authorities said they would begin assessing the possibility of an assisted evacuation using cages after a body was sent up on the ropes. And civil rights groups have sued the government in January after videos surfaced showing piles of dead bodies in the mine. In the court petitions, recently rescued miners revealed that the conditions underground forced them to eat cockroaches and human flesh, and that some people tried to escape had fallen to their death. All right, so that's a basic intro of what's been going on in South Africa beginning August, September of 2024, and this episode has ended in January, on January 16, to be specific, when the vast majority of the men were rescued from these mines. But let's talk about how we got here, how the government responded, what the community response has been, shall we? Now, to fully appreciate what is happening here, it is important that we establish South Africa's relationship with mining, right? And more than many other nations, I know a lot of nations will claim, or at least can say, that the mining sector has played a huge role in whatever they are as a modern nation, right? But some places are more intimately tied to a commodity, right? You can talk about different places that have oil, but then you can look at what is done for a place like Saudi Arabia. You can look at a place that has this thing, that has a movie industry. Then you can look at, or an entertainment industry, and you can look at what is done for the U.S. Or dare I say that, you know, every country, or most countries, virtually all of them, have a military. None have the military industrial complex that the U.S. has, for example. So the same goes with mining in South Africa, going way back. Now, in pre-colonial times, right, you still see limited use of gold. I mean, a lot of iron use and so forth. You see this in different artifacts. But gold use wasn't as widespread. And I'm using gold here because gold becomes central to this conversation, because this was indeed a gold mine where this happened. So limited gold use, you see it in the 12th, 13th century kingdom or community of Mapungubwe. You see that gold was central to the success of the Great Zimbabwe, which is a little bit to the north, but still incorporates all the people of the larger Southern African region as part of that trade that would then connect with China and India and beyond. So gold has always been a thing. But where it steps in to shape up, at least gold for sure, but diamonds just before that, and together they form the mineral revolution in South Africa in the 19th century. So what am I talking about? Well, as we know, the different peoples of the South Africa were there, right? The indigenous people. The first people to be there are the Khoi and San people, colloquially called the Bush people. That's an outdated term. But those are the people who are there. Then the Bantu, by way of the Bantu migrations, the different people we call, collectively known as the Bantu, moved out into the area over the years, over the centuries, going back to as early as early years of the Common Era, up to about 1,000 in the Common Era. The Europeans start coming in the 17th century, right? Establishing, with the Dutch establishing a settlement in 1652, then the British establishing a settlement in 1795, and then sort of coming into conflict with not just the Dutch who were settled on the Cape and pushing them inland and so forth, what we call the Great Trek. There's a lot that goes into this, but also coming into conflict with the different groups, the Xhosa, the Zulus, and so forth. All that said, right, brings us to the year 1869. 1869. Let's start with that. Okay. This year, 1869 to 1870, is a turning point in Southern African history as a whole. It ushered in an era of dramatic change prompted by the discovery of the first diamonds and then gold in the Southern African interior. Now, if you know, places like Botswana is a top 5 country in terms of GNP per capita in Africa. It's one of the better economy, and a lot of that subsists on the diamond. On the diamonds, right? I believe the biggest diamond in history was discovered in Botswana. I could be wrong about that, but if I am, it's from Southern Africa somewhere. So that's in Botswana. But the first time in Southern Africa at all that diamonds were discovered were indeed at Kimberley in South Africa. What happened? So these diamonds are discovered in a place called Kimberley. Now, Kimberley is in this awkward place because at the time it is in a place that is just outside the reach of their reach, but it's outside the Cape Colony, as it were, which by now was dominated by the British, and they had pushed the Boers or the Dutch inland, right? What the Dutch call, or the Boers or the Afrikaners as they got to be called the Great Trek. They'd been pushed inland, and this falls in a place where it's sort of in the middle, but it's populated by different African peoples, right? And the British, seeing that this Kimberley is on the precipice of Boer territory or Afrikaner territory, they decide to promise protection, right, a protectorate status to the African people who lived in that community if they would allow them access into these spaces as a way. So this protection would have been from attacks from the Boers, right? So this is quintessential colonial machinations. But as such, the British began to dominate the space, and from the start, the white people, right, mostly British, dominated the exploitation of these diamond fields at Kimberley. They had the advantages of, 1, technology, and 2, capital. They also had the important backing of British political power. Initially, the mines were exploited by thousands of individual diggers, again, most of them white, but a number of them black. By the late 1870s, right, the principal diamond mines had become huge open pits using expensive steam-powered machinery to haul earth to the surface and dump out flood water. During the 1880s, one company, the De Beers Company, grew to dominate all the others. And if you have another of the De Beers, you may need some richer friends. No, I'm joking. But the De Beers to this day continues to be a prominent diamond company. What you may not know is it was owned by Cecil John Rhodes, right? The famed colonial figure of Southern Africa, from where the name Rhodesia came from. By 1889, the De Beers had bought all its rivals and established a complete monopoly of diamond mining in Kimberley. Right. Under the De Beers monopoly, the role of Africans at the diamond fields was confined to that of manual laborer. De Beers used this monopoly to keep down wages. So those seeking work had to accept 6-month contracts at lower wages than before and live confined in fenced compounds, separated from their families. It was only men who would go to these things, right? And deprived of the opportunity to find alternative income. So this system persisted, little changed in South Africa for the next 100 years, right? So think about that. Think about how this happening, and all of a sudden 30,000 people in the Southern African interior emerging all of a sudden, right? The mines, a major impact of the diamond fields was the development of migrant labor in South Africa. The mines of Kimberley in the 1870s employed up to 50,000 black workers. They came from the British colonies of the Cape, right? Natal, KwaZulu, and the Boer republics, right? That's the Orange Free State and Transvaal. And from the African kingdoms and communities beyond, people were coming out from as far out as Mozambique, modern-day Zimbabwe, and so forth. The wages, although low by today's standards, were higher than could be got elsewhere in Southern Africa. And many people were buying these guns. Were working these jobs to buy guns, because the price of a gun could be earned within a month of working in the mines. It was this that attracted so many Africans to make the long trek to Kimberley, right? So this is happening. So that's Kimberley. It's already gotten the mining, the mineral revolution underway. Okay, but we're only getting started, because in 1886, the Southern African mineral revolution entered a new phase, right? With the discovery of huge quantities of gold at Witwatersrand, right, which is 40 kilometers, what's that, about 25 miles south of Pretoria, which at the time was the Afrikaner capital. This is important, that it's not in the sort of contested space that Kimberley was, but it was in the heart of where the Afrikaners had settled. Right, the capital city, Pretoria, which is still the capital city today. The massive industrial development then that followed as a result of this led to the birth of Johannesburg in 1886, which then grew to be one of the defining metropolises of the world. I mean, you talk about New York, you talk about London, you talk about Tokyo, right? Within that conversation, before you name another 5 cities, you would have to name Johannesburg, right, as one of these very influential global cities. But it's born as a result of the discovery of diamonds in Pretoria. Pretoria and Joburg are virtually next to each other in the state called Gauteng, and the fact that the state or province Gauteng, which means the place of gold, or the nickname that the local nickname for Johannesburg, among others, is Egoli, which is the place of gold, right? Egoli, the place of gold. So this is the discovery of gold in 1886 in these places, right? Within a few years, the gold mining city of Johannesburg had grown from a few tens in the wild to the largest city in sub-Saharan Africa. Almost overnight, the economic center of Southern Africa shifted from Kimberley, where the diamonds were, and the British colonies, to the heartland of the Boer Republic. So what are some of the important changes that happen here? Well, this leads to the formation of South Africa as we know it in many ways, because the British, knowing that the Dutch at this point, who had been almost, the Afrikaners or the Boers, who had been almost bankrupted by feuds with the Pedi up until this point, are now stuck in this position now where they have the gold, but they have not industrialized quite as fast or at all in the way that the British have. The British cannot just seize this without going to full-out war with the Boers, who they've already pushed out. The reason that they are far out in Pretoria in the north is because they pushed them out from the Cape. So the deal they get into was that the British could mine and set up the infrastructure because they had the resources. But just they pay taxes, right? But now they're paying a lot of taxes to the Dutch, to the Boer settlers, in ways that's even able to revive a flailing Boer economy, because they've been almost bankrupted by fighting these different African groups. Right. So while that's happening, by the time we get to the 1890s, the British are fed up under the leadership of Cecil John Rhodes. They are fed up with continuously having to pay taxes and do things according to the whims of the Afrikaners or the Boers, who have the land where the gold is, right? So they end up attacking them, and even though the Boers are able to put up a fight initially, and Paul Kruger who's the leader of the Boers, ends up fleeing to Europe, coming back. And eventually this leads to the Anglo-Boer Wars, or what are known as the South African Wars right now, between the Dutch and the British settlers in the early 20th century, which ultimately lead to the formation of the Union of South Africa, which unified the British and the Dutch settlers who were fighting there, and they became citizens of the Union of South Africa. You know who's not citizens of this, though? The black people, who make up 80+% of the population. And that's we see the seeds of what would eventually become apartheid in 1948. But in all this, mining remained central to South Africa. In fact, if you hear songs like Shosholoza, Shoshol, Oema, hey, I'm doing my best here. But that song, which you hear if you've watched movies like Invictus, it's a song of celebration. The story itself, the song itself talks about we go to the mines. We are off to the mines, and we're talking about the steamela, which is the steam train that used to ferry people from different parts of South Africa and Southern Africa to go work in the mines. So this was the song that came out from the miners themselves singing. But again, notice how many times the term steamela, which is the Zulu term for a steam train, shows up right in African resistance and African celebration songs from that era. You look at things like even movements like the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, the ICU, one of the most prominent anti-apartheid or anti-domination movements, a labor union, going back to the 1920s, was again really rooted in these folks who had moved these black folks who had moved to the mines, to the cities to work in the mines, as it were. So the relevance of mining over the years through apartheid and beyond, mining remained critical to South African commerce, right? So when you look at it here, as of 2023, these are the stats that I was able to find. The mining sector contributed approximately 6.2% of South Africa's GDP, right? It's a slight decline from previous years because in 2016 that number was at 7.3%. But historically, in 1970, for example, that number was 21%. So even at 6%, which is pretty low right now, that's still pretty significant, right? I was watching something recently that said anything over 5% is a lot, just generally speaking. But despite this decreasing share, mining remains a vital component of South Africa's economy, especially in key provinces. In provinces such as the Northwest Province, where this incident happened, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the Northern Cape, mining contributes 20% to 30% of the income. So that's incredible, right? Those are significant numbers, and that makes this case even more relevant here. The miners rescued from the Stilfontein mine are but a handful of tens of thousands of Zamas, right? The term Zama, which means to try this and to try that. Zama means to try. I know that because even in Shona that word means the same thing. But Zama, it means like hustling, right? Just trying this, trying that. Most of them who are migrants who have come from neighboring countries, shout out Zimbabwe, Mozambique, in the hope of building a better life. But with jobs so scarce, many end up digging illegally for gold in these nightmarish conditions. South Africa has more than 6,000 abandoned mines, the legacy of what was for decades the world's top gold producing country. So once it becomes unprofitable to continue digging, the big companies will move out and leave them just as abandoned mines. The Zamas will then come in and try see if they can find any more gold that's been left over, because what's not profitable for a major company does not mean it's no longer profitable for the common man who might just find a rock and it comes up that way. South Africa's storied gold mining sector has churned out nearly half the gold, bullion, and jewelry ever produced. Listen to that, half the gold ever produced from South. So the country's rapidly aging mines are also the world's deepest, thanks to decades of cheap black labor utilized during apartheid, the system of white minority rule that ended in 1994. So that has made the continuing of operations at many mines costly and dangerous, which has led to the closure. So now that they can't just have these people work officially for close to nothing like they used to, they have the mining companies have had to shut down, but in their place, in their stead, have stepped up these sort of Zamas just doing this, right? So for all and South Africa, so that's the mining history of South Africa. And if you every now and then a controversy comes up, just to emphasize how important mining has been, I looked up the list of the 10 richest people in South Africa, which South Africa, again, by GNP alone or by GDP alone, is the richest country in Africa. Not per capita, but just just absolute GDP. I'll talk about per capita and other such measures shortly here. But of that 10, on that list of 10, 3 of the people who are the richest are mining magnates, right? I know Nicky Oppenheimer is in number 2. Let me see if I can find the stats here. Okay, Nicky Oppenheimer at number 2. Who's the Oppenheimer family is renowned for their legacy in the diamonds industry through the De Beers. Number 4 is Patrice Motsepe, who I believe is the highest, is the richest black person in this space, with a net worth of 3.2 billion. Made his fortune in the mining sector, and is now the founder of African Rainbow Minerals. Ivan Glassenberg, at 8.9 billion, because the former CEO of Glencore, a multinational commodity trading and mining company. So at least 3 here. But a lot of them are investors in banks and so forth, which I can't possibly imagine is separate from the mining industry, right? That's probably what they're investing a lot in this space. But also, even the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, who is very, very wealthy, is just outside of this list. I suspect he would probably be in the top 20, because I was looking at the top 10. But he's worth around $500 million. And Yeah, he has also made his money in mining, indeed. So very very important. However, given that, you might think that that's a wealthy place, right? They've got all that gold, right? And that's just their gold. We're not even talking about the diamonds that they'd also discovered before this, right? Which would add a lot to their wealth. And we're not even talking about the other natural resources. But for all its exploits, it's a middle income economy with the highest GNP, gross national product, on the continent. And as a member of BRICS, right, together with Brazil, Russia, India, and China, South Africa has incredible inequality and unemployment. When I say incredible, I'm not just using that. A staggering 42% unemployment rate has led to high levels of chronic poverty. That number, its unemployment rate, is outpaced by only two countries in the world: Eswatini, right, and Kosovo, leaving many men with little choice but to clamber down gold shafts closed by some of the world's biggest mining companies in order to feed their families. They also have the highest inequality in the world, right? So that's according to the World Bank. And the highest inequality in the world, and you can see visually, there's a visual representations of this, just to see when you go from one neighborhood to another in South Africa, the difference is stark. And the Zamas are often the lowest level workers for larger criminal gangs that ultimately sell the gold abroad. Remember that as we start to get into what really happened in this situation. So allow me to sort of talk about this to bring you up to speed with what's happened in the form of a truncated timeline here that I've been able to put together online. So the Stilfontein gold mine, right? Again, Northwest Province, once a major gold producer, but ceased operations in 2013 for those reasons that I explained. And since its closure, it has been a site for illicit mining activity, with the Zamas attempting to extract remaining gold deposits in these abandoned shafts. So in August 2024, so this has been going on for a while, right? Since 2013 at least, so over 10 years now. But in August 2024, this is when this episode begins. South African authorities initiated a crackdown on these illegal mining activities at Stilfontein. As part of this operation, they sealed key shaft exits and cut off food, water, and medical supplies to force the miners to surface and face arrest. So this has been going on since, I believe, November 2023. This thing of shutting down mines, right, so that you suffocate and you force the people to surface and face arrest. But this one in Stilfontein began in August 2024. This action inadvertently trapped hundreds of illegal miners, the Zamas. Although miners' families and community members pleaded for an official rescue mission, authorities declined, with Minister in the Presidency Kumbuzo Ntshavheni saying the goal was to smoke them out. That statement, rightfully so, prompted criticism from human rights groups who warned of possible mass deaths as several days passed without the miners receiving food. A court order in October finally forced the police to allow community members to send some food down and pull some miners up the shafts using ropes. Authorities at the time put the number of miners at between 350 and 400. So that's the authorities. They were lowballing it, as we shall soon see. November 2024. Reports emerged that many miners remain underground, unable or unwilling to surface due to fear of arrest or retribution from armed gangs controlling their mining operations. Concerns grew over the deteriorating conditions with limited access to food or water. Several people were rescued in sporadic and slow attempts by the community members using ropes. And in November, authorities said they would begin assessing the possibilities of an assisted evacuation using cages after a body was sent up by the ropes. So people are starting to die now. Civil rights groups sued the government in January after videos surfaced showing piles of dead bodies in the mine. In the court petitions, recently rescued miners revealed that the conditions underground forced people to eat cockroaches and human flesh. and that some people try to escape had fallen to their death. So it's getting gruesome. Cockroaches and human flesh, right, of their deceased comrades. January 13, 2025. Following legal challenges and mounting pressure from human rights groups, South African authorities commenced a court-ordered rescue operation at the Stilfontein mine. A metal cage and lift system were employed to retrieve individuals from the depths exceeding 2 kilometers. So 2 kilometers is, if 5 k's is 3.2 miles, 1.6. So around 1.3, 1.4 miles, right? A metal cage and lift system were employed to retrieve these guys. Volunteers from the South African National Civics Organization accompanied rescue teams to advocate for the miners' rights. We'll talk a lot more about that, about the community response, as well as the government response. January 15, 2025. By this date, rescue teams had recovered 78 bodies and brought 246 survivors to the surface. Many survivors were found in emaciated conditions, wearing tattered clothing and without footwear, indicating prolonged deprivation. Then January 16 is when the operation concluded. Authorities announced the conclusion of the rescue operation, stating that no more individuals remained trapped underground. The final death toll was reported to be at least 87 miners. 87 miners. The government's tactics, particularly the blockade of essential supplies, faced significant criticism and called for investigation. So, let's go back a little bit and talk about, we spoke about the history of mining in South Africa, right? But let's talk a little bit about what the problem in this contemporary era is, or reiterate anyway. Informal miners, right, known as the Zamas or hustlers, as I explained, they comb these 6,000 formerly functional gold mines looking for gold deposits or other precious metal deposits. The sites are either officially closed, such as this one, Stilfontein, which was closed in 2013, or have had mining halted because they were deemed unsafe or unviable. Other times, informal miners have targeted functional mines, right? Remember, these are the poorest of the poor people, not just in South Africa, but even the immigrants who are coming from Zimbabwe and these other places. Operations like this have existed for decades, right? And cost South Africa 1 billion yearly in lost revenue. Right? So that's a significant amount of money that further complicates this narrative. They are carried out by almost entirely by poor, undocumented people from neighboring countries. So far, in the Stilfontein case, officials said most are from Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Lesotho, with a few from South Africa. Zamas have a bad reputation in the country and are often viewed as criminals. Officials say the illegal trade is controlled by criminal syndicates that fight one another in gang wars or attack the police. Often, these crime bosses also exploit miners or traffic people into forced mine work. So this here is where it gets tricky. Because from a rule of law standpoint, we can say the government does, not only are they losing more than $1 billion in income, this is fueled in many ways by criminal syndicates who are keeping people, who force people to work for them in the mines and so forth, right? And we'll touch on some of that as well as we go forward here. That is what is of concern to the state. But on the other hand, they are condemning people to almost certain death by blocking the pathways out of these mines is inhumane. I don't think there's too many ways we can slice and dice that in which that comes out okay, right? Because you're condemning these people for certain death for non-violent acts. Even if some of them are violent, the thing that they are being condemned to death for is the illegal mining, right? Otherwise, it would have to be a trial by case-by-case basis to see who's been violent and whatnot. But also, if some of those people are being controlled by criminal syndicates, you're pretty much condemning victims of these criminal syndicates to sure death, because I'm sure the guys who run this, sometimes they are not in the mines themselves, right? The criminal masterminds, they're not in the mines themselves, or they position themselves in places where, as some of my readings showed, that when food will be sent down, they'll be the ones controlling who gets it and who doesn't. So even from within the mines, they are usually doing better than their peers, as we shall see with the case of Tiger at the end. So what were the responses, right? Sabelo Mnguni, these are community responses. Sabelo Mnguni, a spokesman for the Mining Affected Communities Union in Action group, told the Associated Press, this is coming on the 13th, so 3 days before the full rescue happened, that a cell phone sent to the surface with some rescued miners on Friday had 2 videos on it showing dozens of bodies underground wrapped in plastic. The cell phone videos purportedly from the depths of the mine shows dozens of what appear to be dead bodies wrapped in plastics. A man filming on the phone in one of the videos can be heard saying, "This is hunger. People are dying because of hunger," as he records emaciated-looking men sitting on the damp floor in the mine. Then he says, "Please help us. Bring us food or take us out." Mnguni said a minimum of 100 men had died. So was he exaggerating? But if he's exaggerating, 87 is not too far away from 100. It's still a very, very terrible number. Or it could be the state understating the death toll, right? It's not like unlike the state to understate the death toll, especially if it has some culpability in that death toll. The community, listen, on that day on the 13th, the community organized its own rescue operation before the official effort by the authorities began on Monday the 16th. They say a proper rescue operation should have been launched months ago. We are happy. This is another organization. So that first organization was